The House GOP meeting began with a prayer and the Pledge of Allegiance. Then, the conference chair, Kathy McMorris Rogers, recognized McCarthy, whom everyone in the room, save for Boehner and Ryan, was expecting to make his closing pitch for the job. Instead, McCarthy offered a tearful exit from the race. Boehner immediately asked for recognition from the chair. "I move to adjourn," he shouted, nodding to McMorris Rogers to bang the gavel. Before anyone knew what had hit them, the meeting was over. McCarthy was out, and Ryan was making a beeline out of the room and toward his office, avoiding the media throngs sure to descend on him after learning the news. Boehner, lighting a cigarette as he returned to his office, was preparing to pull out the stops. McCarthy had been right about one thing. Ryan was the only House Republican who could unify the party. Now, Boehner felt, he had a responsibility to help Ryan see that. For the next 12 days, Ryan's phone did not stop ringing. First, it was Boehner, explaining the situation and impressing upon his old friend that he had no choice in the matter. The party needed him. Then it was Mitt Romney, his former running mate, saying much the same. Then it was Priebus, his longtime pal and fellow Wisconsinite. Then it was a chorus of senators, lobbyists, donors, think tankers, all the allies he'd compiled over 2 decades in Washington. At one point, Ryan turned his phone off, disappeared into the woods outside Janesville by himself, wielding a bow and arrow, crouching in a cramped tree stand for nearly an entire day. When he switched the phone back on, it buzzed once more. The voice on the other end belonged to Cardinal Timothy Dolan, Archbishop of New York and President of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, telling Ryan of his obligation to serve at a moment of national uncertainty. Ryan, an observant Catholic, was vexed and bemused. He called Boehner. "You son of a bitch," he told the speaker. "You sicked Dolan on me?" "Yes, I did," Boehner replied, "and I'll have the Pope calling your sorry ass next if you don't smarten up." Ryan sighed. His opposition to serving in a leadership position was rooted in family. The congressman had lost his father at 55, and neither his grandfather nor his great-grandfather had lived to see 60. Ryan also carried tremendous guilt about living away from his wife and 3 young children, not to mention his brother and wife and their kids, who lived a few blocks away, on top of a bevy of cousins and family friends in Janesville. The town had always been his refuge. He already spent Mondays through Fridays in Washington and had no appetite for jet-setting the country in his spare time, giving speeches and shaking down donors. But what if he didn't have to? Ryan convened a call with his top advisors and told them he would consider the job with 2 conditions: that he be given weekends to spend with his family, and that the whole of the House GOP support his candidacy. Having watched the Freedom Caucus heap abuse on Boehner, Ryan would not step into the job unless its members were on record with their support of him. This ultimatum irked some members in the Freedom Caucus. Seeing their leverage slip away, Raul Labrador and Justin Amash implored their colleagues to keep a poker face. They would demand a summit with Ryan, airing their gripes pertaining to Boehner's closed-off legislative process and his punitive tendencies. Some of their comrades agreed, but others arched an eyebrow. The group had effectively driven Boehner out of town. Now they were going to play hardball with Ryan, the closest thing to an ideological soulmate any of them could imagine holding the speaker's gavel. The summit was anticlimactic. Ryan shared the conservatives' frustration with how the House had been run and pledged to restore balance between the chamber's powerful chairman and its backbench members. A small clique of hardliners decided to hold out, but a supermajority of the Freedom Caucus, roughly 30 of its 36 members, swore their support to Ryan. Boehner did his best to provide a smooth transition for his successor. A web of thorny legislation awaited action in late 2015, a debt ceiling deadline, an unresolved budget to keep the government open, and a fight to strip funding from Planned Parenthood, among other items. Boehner promised Ryan he would clear the barn, legislative speak, for passing a sweeping set of bills to provide a clean slate for the new speaker. It was cathartic for Boehner. Not only would he be pissing off the conservatives for a final time, but he would also have a chance to unload on Obama, who had different ideas for handling the fall's agenda. On a conference call with the president and Mitch McConnell 1 week before his departure, Boehner recalls Obama voicing his displeasure with the speaker's preferred path before venturing into one of his patented homilies. Boehner held the phone away from his ear for several moments, gesturing to his staff to bring him an ashtray. When he listened back in, Obama was still going. I waited 3, 4, 5 minutes, and finally I said, Mr. President, I didn't get on this goddamn phone call to listen to you lecture me one more time, Boehner recalls. Then I hung up. I'm sure McConnell was shitting in his pants. An hour later, Boehner's staff informed him that an agreement was in place with the Senate and the White House. Watching from across the Capitol, McConnell mourned his counterpart's departure while rejoicing at his opportunity to lead a more civilized institution. I don't have the luxury of having some kind of philosophical purity test, and I've never tried to have one, but it is noteworthy we don't have a Freedom Caucus in the Senate, McConnell says. I think we play well with others, almost all of us. Our members are more pragmatic because they just have broader constituencies, whereas in the House, obviously that's sometimes quite different. On October 29th, Ryan was elected Speaker of the House, and Boehner was sent into the sunset with a prolonged standing ovation, tears streaming down his face as he walked to the back of the chamber to witness the coronation of his successor. Boehner was leaving a complex legacy. As a young House member, he had been instrumental in cleaning up Congress. As a committee chairman, he had written and ushered through one of the premier policies of the Bush administration. And as Speaker, Boehner had accomplished more than the conservatives would ever give him credit for, securing meaningful spending cuts under a Democratic president, protecting the overwhelming majority of Americans from a tax hike, banning earmarks and keeping them banned despite the negotiating leverage it robbed him of, and his proudest accomplishment, fixing a nagging problem with the Medicare payment formula that could produce nearly $3 trillion in savings over the ensuing 3 decades. Yet these will be overshadowed by posterity's more existential observations. That Boehner's 25 years in Washington saw the dissolution of a party, the vandalizing of a government, the splintering of a nation. That Boehner watched as the GOP transformed from the party of George H.W. Bush into the party of Donald Trump. That Boehner funded and helped recruit a class of majority makers who drove him from office and destabilized the Congress he cares deeply about. The triumph of John Boehner was that he achieved reform and ascended to the speakership while rising above the uncompromising dogma of both parties. The tragedy is that he came to Congress an insurgent, only to be swallowed by the insurgency, and that he wasted momentous opportunities, as with the shutdown and immigration battles of 2013, to lead in a way that might have quelled it. Mike Summers, the Speaker's chief of staff, says it best: "We fed the beast that ate us."